One of the most common questions I get is, hey, how do I take this object and pull it off of its background? Well, it really depends on the image in question. If the object that the person wants to pull off the background, if it's sitting on a very busy background, that can be a real tall order. That can be tough stuff. But something like this statue, which is sitting on a relatively solid background. And by the way, when I took this photo, it was a very overcast day. So this is actually cloud cover in the background, if you can believe it. So we have this very sort of almost solid color background, which makes it much, much easier to pull an object off of the background. So if you can, if you're, for example, taking photographs of objects and you know that you want to pull the object off of its background, put it on a white piece of paper or stick some kind of a solid colored background behind the object, and that'll make your work inside Photoshop a lot easier. I'm going to explain how to pull this object off of the background. I'm also going to show you a dialog box called Refine Edge, and we're also going to talk more about this background layer. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to zoom in just a touch here. Control or Command plus is just fine. And I just ran you through a whole bunch of different selection tools not too long ago for selecting different objects. So once again, as I was mentioning back then, for me anyway, it's a process of elimination. Well, could I use my rectangular selection tool to select this statue? No. Could I use perhaps the magic wand? Well, maybe. Could I use any of the lasso tools? Maybe. Perhaps the magnetic lasso tool would work well on something like this. But my favorite selection tool by far is the quick selection tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab this guy, and of course, I'm sure you remember this guy. He's going to create selections by painting, quite literally painting a selection, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my cursor up to the brush drop-down menu at the top of the screen there on the options bar. I'm just going to crank up the size of my brush just a little bit, maybe a little bit larger, maybe into about 40 perhaps. Yep, that'll work for us. And all I'm going to do is start painting out this selection. So I'm painting on the background, right? So I'm going to paint all the way down the left-hand side of the image. And then, let's see, I'm going to go across the top as well. There we go. And underneath the wing of the angel there, the statue. And then we have two tiny slivers of background that we need to select right below the angel's left hand there, right in there by the staff, and way down in the bottom right corner. So I'm going to zoom in on this tiny little gap of space here, right in here. And what I'm going to have to do is reduce the size of my brush, perhaps all the way down to maybe about 15 or 10 or somewhere in there, maybe about 12, maybe even a little bit smaller than that, because we don't want to grab any of the actual, statue itself. Let's see. There we go, something like that. Probably a single click. Yep, a single click will do it. Okay, perfect. And then I also have to grab this little sliver of background way down in the bottom right corner, if I zoom in on that area there. And once again, I should probably increase the size of my brush, but I'm going to try and get it done here just with this small brush. There we go. 1 or 2 clicks should get that background for you. Okay, go ahead and zoom all the way out, Control or Command 0. Now, I mentioned that I wanted to show you a dialog box called Refine Edge. And this Refine Edge dialog box, what it's going to do is allow us to create a tighter selection, a more accurate selection. So I have all of my marching ants now on the image. So the background of the image is selected. The statue itself is not selected, right? And I'm still on the Quick Select tool, and up on the options bar, I see a button called Refine Edge. If I click on this guy, then I get this Refine Edge dialog box showing up. And notice that the background is still normal. It's still selected there. And anything that is not selected, the angel itself or the statue itself, is filled with white. Now what you can do is you can change that with this view mode drop down. So perhaps we could go with this red overlay, something like this, or perhaps on black, more like a mask, something like that. Whatever you're most comfortable with, it doesn't really matter. You could go all the way back to the marching ants if you want. I kind of like this on black, to be honest, because it gives me that high contrast so I can really see the edges of my selection. But again, it's entirely up to you. What I can do here is I can work with this edge detection area here, and I can adjust the radius of my selection. And as I'm adjusting this radius, you'll see some changes happening inside the selection there, very subtly, by the way. So I can see that I'm actually starting to encroach in on my statue just a little bit. I can start to see some detail there. Well, that's no good. I'm going to drop this guy all the way back down to 0, or near 0 anyway. There we go, something like that. And then we have the adjust edge as well. So I can adjust the smoothing on the edge of this selection. I can adjust the feathering. Do you know what feathering is? That would soften the edge of the selection, maybe something like this, right? Now that's something that I don't want. I want a very hard-edged selection. So I'm going to pull this guy all the way back down to the left. Okay. I can adjust the contrast if I want as well. Once again, to create a tighter selection around my object. As always, there's no silver bullet here inside Photoshop. You're going to have to come in here and fiddle around and experiment until you get exactly what it is that you're after. Here I have this Shift Edge option as well, which again, you can use to adjust your selection. Okay, so for myself, I'm going to drop the contrast back down. I might adjust my smoothing just a little bit. I have my Shift Edge adjusted just a little bit there as well. When I'm happy with the result, I'm going to go ahead and click on OK, and that adjusts my selection inside my image, my marching ants. I'm very anxious to get this guy off of his background. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to save that for the next exercise. So just sit tight, and I'll show you how to actually pull this guy now off of his background.